Oh my goodness, you didn't wake me up when you showed up. I've already lost 30 seconds. I was trying to ping over here. All right, this debate is about whether or not homeschooling should be illegal. And I basically framed it in such that homeschooling should not be illegal and those who want to do so are evil. To properly frame the debate, we should define certain terms. Homeschooling here refers not to supplemental efforts to teach children who attend public school, but to teach children at home instead of sending them to public schools. Legal and illegal means that mean legislative and court actions. Laws or regulations are put into place that ban or prohibit removing children from public schools or charter schools or whatever. The laws or regulations at first, if it was made illegal, might have minimum penalties at first for violations, but the state is basically saying that parents can't homeschool and the state can take action if they do so. So finally, I take a look and say, if you are supporting making homeschool illegal, this is kind of an evil thing. And what I would define, we'd have to take a look at what's evil. For some people, the Nuremberg defense of, I was only following orders. If the government passed a law and we're following it, it's okay. Well, I think that if it's immoral, even if the government does it, it's illegal. Okay, some people believe that there's absolute right and wrongs. Murder is wrong, whether it's the government doing it or whether it's an individual. Okay, the crematoriums in Nazi Germany were legal, but they were totally immoral and they were evil. My belief that it is evil to take away other people's rights, it is evil to restrict free speech, it is evil to steal, and it is evil to disrupt parental rights. Now, somebody might say, oh, there ought to be a law, and they having said that doesn't necessarily make them evil, but if being told, here are the ramifications of that, then what you're doing is you're basically saying, yeah, I've been told that this is bad, this is potentially dangerous, but I still support that. At that point, I think you've transcended from just an ignorant, yeah, I believe there should be a law, to, hey, I support doing something that's really, so we'll let you pick it up there.
Okay. Now, I accepted this debate because I was homeschooled myself. And I was homeschooled by an abusive parent. My siblings have emotional trauma. Some of them have been diagnosed with PTSD. I know multiple people who have significant emotional issues, who have suffered physical and sometimes sexual abuse because of homeschooling. So I recognize that there are pros and cons to homeschooling. And I think that it is absolutely ridiculous to say that anyone who would consider the idea of banning homeschooling is necessarily evil. That's absolutely not the case. And so I want to show why that's not the case. Now, for the pro to be correct in this resolution, he would have to show three things. First, he has to show that homeschooling's results are so good that it should remain legal. For the most part, I think he can show this, and I would almost agree with this part. The second thing he would have to show would be that homeschooling is so overwhelmingly good that to think otherwise would be evil. He sort of mentioned this in his own standards when he was like, people can have a difference of opinion, but if they are shown that something is fully wrong, then it would be evil to think the other side. So if he can show that homeschooling is so overwhelmingly good that it would be evil to think otherwise, that would be the second standard he would have to uphold. And the third thing that would have to happen would be the pro would have to show that those who advocate making homeschooling illegal are not just wrong, but evil at heart. In fact, in the resolution, the way he phrased it, he not only wrote evil, but he wrote in caps lock, evil. Homeschooling should remain legal, and people who would try to make it illegal are evil. I absolutely do not think this is the case. Now, let me talk about, I'm not going to talk about the first standard as much as the second and third ones. The second standard was that homeschooling is so overwhelmingly good that to think otherwise would be evil. I think that this is false. I think there are multiple problems you can see with homeschooling. One of them would be socialization. It's very difficult for homeschoolers to become socialized because they have not had the social aspects that many people at public or private schools have had. Another problem with homeschooling is that of qualified teachers. A homeschool parent is just a parent. There are no standards for the actual teachers themselves. So oftentimes I have witnessed homeschoolers who have been taught in ways that simply don't help them. They aren't ready for the world. They aren't ready because they have not had any qualified teaching. And the third problem I want to present about homeschooling is that of abuse. In a system where there are standards, the people can be protected, but homeschoolers don't have any of that because it's entirely up to the parents.
Okay. First of all, the thing is that parental rights and homeschooling, I believe, are inalienable natural rights, much like speech is. Speech does not need to be proven to be good before it is permitted. It is permitted. Even if it is not good, it is permitted. Government regulating of speech for the sake of good would be wrong, and people who would propose regulations on speech, I think, would be basically empowering a big government to decide what is acceptable speech is one and what is unacceptable speech, and to do so, I think, is evil. Anything that tends to create a bigger and more tyrannical government is evil. Okay, I mean, you had a quote that's been attributed to George Washington, but may not have, is government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is not force. Like a fire, a troublesome servant, and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible actions. Now, you're calling for me to prove that homeschooling must be so good that to be permitted. Well, that's like saying speech must be so good before it's permitted to be speech, so that the government can measure whether speech is good or not and then permit it, and they have a right to block it. That's a wrong thing. Your second one was it has to be so overarchingly convincing that it's good before it's permitted. Again, it's wrong. Nobody has to prove that they have a right before they're able to exercise it. If they have to prove it is not a right, it is something that's made subject to the government whims and mandates, whether it's conditional or not. It is something that the government can evaluate, and they can use the government can use their own scales to determine whether it should be permitted or not. The real essence is liberty and freedom. Ronald Reagan basically said government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives. Micromanaging parents in how they raise their children and teach them is running their lives. And he gave us a warning. He basically said government is never more dangerous than when our desire to have it helps us, blinds us to the growing power to harm us. So, and you have to recognize that homeschooling is a right. It's like free speech, regardless of the content of free speech. It's a right. Homeschoolers should not be burdened to prove that they educate better. In a good world, the burden is on the school system to prove that they can do a better job and convince parents to voluntarily relinquish their kids and send them to the school.
The purpose of government, and as a libertarian, I believe you are a libertarian conservative, so I think you would agree with me on this, but the purpose of government is to preserve the individual's life, liberty, and property, and give each of them an equal opportunity to be successful later in life. It is not to mandate that they must have equal outcomes. It is to give them equality of opportunity. I think you would agree with me on this, but I'll let you talk about that in a little bit if you would agree on that. But the reason this is important is because this ties into the whole idea of education. And I'll explain more about that in a moment here. But you talked about how homeschooling is an inalienable natural right. I have three responses to this. My first response is this is just your opinion. You presented nothing to suggest that this is actually an inherent human right or that inherent human rights even exist. You just said it, but there's no reason to believe it. You have to show why this would be the case. The second response I have is, what about abuse? If abuse is occurring in homeschooling situations, and I'm telling you from personal experience it is, then abuse it would invalidate that idea that it is an inalienable human right. Because the first human right that we would focus on would be that of preserving the life and liberty of those children who are being abused. Where does the interplay come into this? Where do you get this idea that parents just have this inherent right to do whatever they want with their kids. That's just not the case. If parents are committing something which would be abusive or harming their children in some way, they do not have a right to do that. There's nothing that would suggest they just get to tell their kids whatever they want to. That's completely false. The third response is that of human right and equal opportunity. Now, the reason this is important is because we're talking about schooling. If parents choose that their form of schooling is to just let their kids do whatever they want, and that's their version of homeschooling, well, they have denied that child the equal opportunity to be successful later in life. That's the whole reason we have an education standard. That's why governments exist, to try to preserve the life and liberty and property of the people and enable them the equal opportunity to be successful. But if parents are denying that opportunity to their children, and I can tell you from personal experience, they absolutely are through homeschooling, that is abusive and must be limited. Now let's come back to the resolution itself. Homeschooling should remain legal, and people who would try to make it illegal are evil. Nothing my opponent has shown you has shown anything about how being against homeschooling is necessarily evil. The standards that I presented were not saying that homeschooling is bad. I think that in a lot of ways, homeschooling can be good. But my problem is, with this resolution, he's saying that anyone who disagrees is necessarily evil, which is completely false.
Okay. First of all, we're going to have to take a look at the fact that inherent rights are not necessarily strictly limited to what's in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Our founding fathers would be totally amazed that you're asking somebody to justify and prove that parents have the right to determine how to educate their children, instead of going to the state with hat in hand asking permission, please, may I? Okay, it's like speech. We do not need to get the state's permission to do it. And when I have to debate with somebody on whether the idea of good and evil, and somebody does not agree with the Constitution, Declaration, and limited government, and that the people are supreme and have a government to work for them and not the other way around, it's like a discussion between a civilized person and a headhunter about the dinner menu. You first need to resolve whether human flesh can be put on the menu. I talk about there's a difference of opinion. You can decide that you don't like homeschooling. I'm basically saying that if you wish to give government the power to invade people's homes, lock people up, take their children away from them, that is an evil. I don't have to do much to demonstrate homeschooling is superior to public schooling. I don't have to prove that it's a whole lot overriding. I would invite you to go back and take a look at the call-out debates on August 21st, where Mr. Daniel Sheehan argued persuasively on the con side why homeschooling was good and why it should not be made illegal. Now you are arguing against him, and you're saying that it should be okay to have it made illegal. That is totally and completely illogical. When you empower the government is something that can be grown bigger and bigger, and can be very evil. It is wrong to give government more and more power. Okay, you go back to the basics. Parents have a right to choose the course of their education. And right now, when public schools are so bad that there are more public school teachers on average that will choose to put their kids in private or charter or homeschool than the average general public, it tells you something about the capacity of public schools. People have a right to make these choices, and only if and when the government in specific cases can show a problem is there a chance for somebody to step in. But you don't have an overall, outright, complete, total ban on homeschooling. That's been done in Germany. If you want to follow the German law, I would suggest, if you like Germany, move to Germany. Don't try and bring German laws here. That's immoral. It's wrong.
All right, so my first overall response is that disagreement does not equal evil. Disagreement is different than evil. You have come up with this idea that anyone who advocates for a larger size of government is committing something which is horrible and they are therefore evil. Your resolution says that those who would try to make homeschooling illegal are evil. Not even just that the belief itself is evil, but that they themselves are necessarily evil. This is completely false. Just because we have a disagreement in this discussion does not mean that I see you as evil. It means I think you're wrong, but I don't see you as evil. In the same way that I actually disagree with the idea of making homeschooling illegal, as you yourself pointed out. But I certainly do not think that Josh Brandon, who I had an excellent debate with, I do not believe that he is evil. There are organizations, for instance, Homeschoolers Anonymous, where former homeschoolers who have been abused and harmed by the homeschooling system post about their stories and say something must be done. Regulation must be passed. Something must be done to protect people like us from these situations of abuse. Those children who were abused, who are now advocating for government oversight to protect others like them, are not evil. You might disagree with their solution, but they are not evil. I know some of them personally, some of my, how do I say this anonymously, but some of the people close to me have written such posts. They are not evil. They are not advocating evil. They have advocated for increased oversight to protect human rights. Now let's come back to your overall point, which is that the founding fathers would have been shocked because we were trying to give government power here. Well, unless you're advocating anarchy, which I don't believe you are, I don't think you're an anarcho-capitalist. I believe you would accept some level of government, right? The purpose of government, and I think we'd agree on this, is to preserve the life, liberty, and property of the people. If parents are going to abuse their children, then some level of regulation must exist. In the debate that you watched with me debating Josh Brandon, I actually advocated for homeschooling with oversight. And I also understand why there would be arguments saying homeschooling should be illegal. Those people are not evil. They might have a difference of opinion, and they might have a different solution to how they get there. Like, for instance, both I would say oversight is better than ban. But I still understand the arguments themselves. They are important arguments, and to say that those who would make such arguments are evil is completely incorrect.
Okay, thank you for conceding several points of the debate. You agree that homeschooling is good. You agree it's effective. You've previously debated that it is good. You've actually previously debated that it should not be illegal, but it should have regulations. Thank you. I've won the first half almost completely convincingly. Okay, the thing I'm trying to take a look at is I've never said I oppose regulations. I've never said that there shouldn't be some oversight and some control. I said that it would be wrong to make it illegal, and anybody who's pushing to make a complete and total ban and make it illegal is basically trying to screw parents over and empower the state to control over parents. They're basically allowing the state to be able to decide to knock on the door, come in, take kids away if they don't think that's happening. Now, there's plenty of cases where I can cite where you've had a zealous government. I'll point to you, for example, the idea of some baker who refuses to bake a cake for a gay couple, and they get a $136,000 fine because a Human Rights Commission has made a regulation that says you can't do it. And for First Amendment free speech and free association rights to be damned, that's less important than bake the damn cake. And they come in and basically are going to strip mine them of their rights, their financials, and that's a government out of control. And anybody who advocates those sort of legislation, laws, rules that would allow the government to come in and catastrophically harm families is evil. It is not evil to disagree, and it's not evil to say, yeah, I think we ought to ban homeschooling, but to actively push for a ban, not regulation. I got no problems with regulations. We can discuss what sort of regulations exist in the state of Washington. And in fact, the homeschoolers in the state of Washington said, here are some of the things that we think are reasonable and should be passed on every homeschooling family. That's reasonable. Nobody has a problem with that. But I framed the debate to say it should not be made illegal. And somebody who wants to push to make it illegal, and I'm talking about actively push. I'm talking about they want to give the government the power. It'd be like giving the government the power to regulate speech, and we lose our free speech. Somebody who pushed to end free speech, I think, is evil. Somebody who pushes to end the right of free association is evil. Somebody who pushes to take away parents' rights on homeschooling is equally evil. We can have differences, but don't screw with our personal private rights.
So you literally believe that the entire Democratic Party is evil? And you would, yes? Okay. I mean, this is the reason that I really wanted to take this debate. One of the reasons I love QallOut is because it's about breaking down echo chambers. And I don't mean to make this personal or anything, but when you make a statement like that, you are saying that anyone who disagrees with you has an opinion that is so wrong that it makes them as a person evil. This is a huge problem, and it's something that I see in our society today. People who are on the right get all of their news from right-leaning sources, and people who are on the left get all of their news from left-leaning sources. The right gets their news from Breitbart and Fox News. The left gets it from CNN and Huffington Post and other left-leaning sources. And because of this, the right will be told all sorts of demonizing stories about the left, and the left will be told all sorts of demonizing stories about the right. And as their viewers keep tuning in to these increasingly polarized news sources, they continue to believe that their opponents are more and more evil, without seeming to realize that a lot of the time, both of them will see a problem. For instance, we see problems in the school system today. There are problems with it. This is why conservatives will often advocate for charter schools or more homeschooling or more school vouchers, whereas liberals will advocate for increased government oversight. Now, I personally disagree with the idea of increased government oversight, but I absolutely 100% do not believe that those people are evil for having that as their solution. I think they're wrong. I don't think that's the best possible solution. I think there's probably better alternatives. Just like when it comes to homeschooling, I don't think that it is necessarily evil to advocate the idea of homeschooling being illegal. I think there are better alternatives. Like you and I would both agree that some level of government oversight would be good in this issue. And also, if you're saying that some level of government oversight is acceptable, then you have to drop your whole idea about the founding fathers and everything, because you're already agreeing that some level of government oversight is acceptable. So you can't take this stance that they would be all upset with that. The question of this debate is, are the people who would advocate against homeschooling, are they evil? As opposed to just being wrong. In order to show that, you would have to show that they know in their hearts that homeschooling is fantastic, and yet they still choose to advocate against it. That would be evil. But you've never shown anything like that. In fact, I presented multiple reasons why they could have a legitimate reason to believe homeschooling should be illegal. That's the difference.
Okay. Basically, I think what it comes down to is, and I don't think Democrats by themselves are evil. I think the Democrat Party has a history of evil. They supported slavery. They fought to end slavery. After slavery was ended, they had segregation, KKK, Jim Crow laws. They've continued that for years. And even now, they oppose school choice. They would rather keep kids, especially minority kids, poor kids, in failing inner city schools so that they can keep the teachers' union happy. Any organization that takes teacher money, that protects corrupt, inept, inefficient teachers and screws over the little kids is, in my opinion, evil. And I think anybody who supports a system that continues to screw over people or kids and takes taxpayer money and wastes it and builds up a $20 trillion debt for our future children, that's evil. And if somebody knowingly, willingly understands that homeschooling should be a good option, but advocates to make it illegal, not impose regulations, but to make it illegal, anybody who knowingly understands how good it can be and yet would make it illegal, that's the point that I say somebody is evil. Now, I'm not calling you evil because you're not really serious about making it illegal. But anybody who could have a debate like this and then turn around and go, I don't care what you say. I don't care about all those effective homeschoolers that have been good. Yeah, there's a very small minority. Go look at the debate on 21 August, where you basically indicate that that's such a minority and it's far less of what's in the public school system. That's not a reason to make it illegal. So anybody who can listen to the debate and then continue to advocate for making it illegal, they are evil. So I'll pass the mic to you.
All right, so talk about how Democrats have a history of evil and how the things that they advocate for today you consider evil. Well, that's your own personal opinion. They don't see it that way. That's the difference here. See, the thing about QallOut is that we can have these sorts of discussions. We can talk with people who have a completely different opinion with us, and we can try and understand why their position is the way it is. That's the whole point of free speech. One of the fundamental benefits of free speech is the recognition of the fact that we might be wrong. But if we just are so certain that our position is correct, that we are unwilling to actually listen to their side, we will never grow. We will never learn, and there will be no benefit to having that free speech in the first place. That's the benefit of free speech. You might disagree with Democrats, and a lot of the time I do too, but that doesn't make them evil. It just means they have a different solution. They think that this is the best way to help people. I had another debate with Megan Newsom, and she has a completely different view than I do. She advocates socialism. She advocates progressivism. And I really enjoyed that discussion. And I love talking with Megan because even though we see the world in a different way, I think that she's shown me a lot of different things that if I'm really trying to listen and understand, I see where she's coming from. I can see that with a lot of people on this site. And that's the difference here. Again, we got to come back to this topic. It's not, I mean, yes, I think that homeschooling is usually good. I think there are a lot of benefits to it. But I also see that there are huge problems with homeschooling, and I can absolutely empathize with those who would advocate that homeschooling should be illegal. Let's talk about some of the people who have advocated that homeschooling should be illegal. Josh Brandon, who I debated with, do you think he's evil because he had that perspective? Is that what you're saying? That dude is a cool guy. He had some good points. I think I won that debate. I don't think he's evil. I think he's wrong. It's a huge difference. Homeschoolers Anonymous. I have personal friends who have anonymously posted on that site saying the abuses that we have suffered are so great that it is necessary to either heavily regulate or make this illegal because of the abuses that we do not want others to have to go through. Do you think the people who wrote those posts are evil? I don't. I might disagree with the conclusion they come to if they think it must be outlawed, but they're not evil. They're trying to help people. That's their goal. That's the difference here. How about Homeschooling's Invisible Children, another organization, a nonprofit that tries to defend these homeschoolers who have been abused. And the reason why homeschoolers get abused is because there's no legal process for them to go through. They're protected by their family, keeps them away from the government and away from others, so they can't be found out. It's abusive and it's dangerous.
Okay, couple of things. It's hard to keep up with you, but for example, socialism. Okay, I've got no problem if somebody believes in socialism. I'm all for is all the socialists going off and forming a commune and voluntarily living in communism or socialism or whatever they want to call it. But as soon as they try and force socialism on me, they are evil. Okay, I have no problems with people being opposed to homeschooling, and they can have their groups and they say we really don't like it and we have all these problems. But as soon as they try and make legislation that would prevent me from doing it, I think they're evil. Anytime somebody wants to take personal rights and liberties away from other people because they don't like something and they want to use the power of government, and government is force. They can fine somebody or they can do worse. If somebody doesn't pay the fine, they send the police over to collect the fine. If they don't pay the fine, they confiscate assets. They can seize somebody's house. They can foreclose on the house. If somebody resists, they can lock them up. If they resist too much, they can shoot them. over a law that somebody said, I think there should be a law that says something should be illegal. Our federal government is set up on minimal government, and states and locals should also recognize the same thing in the fact that people's liberties should be maximized and government should be minimized. We've agreed that, yes, there should be some oversight and regulation, but when you fully empower the government to prohibit homeschooling, anybody who pushes that, anybody who helps pass the legislation and advocate it, is trying to deny me my rights, and I do think that they are evil. It would be like you getting into an auto crash and then you go on a rampage and you want to make cars illegal and you want to ban cars and make everybody use some other form of transportation besides cars. Because you don't like something and you were hurt something does not give you the right to take the right from other people to continue doing it. So I'll pass the mic back to you.
I really like your example of if I got into a car crash and I thought that the dangers of cars were so great that I wanted to protect other human beings from suffering such pain and suffering that I had gone through, that I would try to make that illegal. Yeah, I could see that. But that wouldn't make me evil. That would make me someone you disagree with. That would be completely different than me being necessarily evil. And I think that's really the perspective that I have that you don't have in this debate here. That's the thing that separates us. You think that someone who disagrees with you is necessary. Well, sorry, let me correct that. You think someone who disagrees with you and tries to make that legislative policy is necessarily evil. That is simply not the case. One of the whole ideas of living in a representative government is that we each can advocate for our different ideas in governance. That's the whole point of living in a republic or a democracy. You might disagree with the policies that the people around you want to pursue, and they might want to try and pass them, but that is their right as well. Let's talk about this. Voting is a inherent, at least in this country, is an inherent right of the people. We have a natural right in this country to elect legislators who we believe will support what we want. That is the ultimate right here. You're trying to say that if they push something you don't like, that is a inherently evil thing? No, it's not. You have a perfect way of getting around that, which would be elect people who agree with you. That's your ability to do this. You still have your choice here. You talk about, you know what, here's the thing. I agree with a lot of your perspectives. I think both of us are ones who would certainly advocate for limited government and a more decentralized system. I agree with you that voluntary socialism is much, much preferable to the idea of forced socialism or federally mandated. I agree with you that the idea that having government advocate against someone's rights or make laws against someone's rights would be problematic. But what the difference is, what you're saying is necessarily evil is what I'm saying is a disagreement. And that's the benefit of call-out. We can disagree with someone and yet not think of them as evil.
Well, I guess the difference is that I feel that if somebody is pushing around and is a bully, it's right to call them a bully. I think if somebody advocates taking away individual rights, take away my liberties, that's evil. Back in the 1850s, there was slavery. And I truly believe that people who had slaves were evil. I believe that people who said, I personally would not own slaves, but I don't see a problem with slavery, it's okay, I think that's evil. I have no problems with saying we can have disagreements on various things. But at the point that somebody is willing to push their opinions into legislative action in a way to take away my liberties and my freedom, that's the point that I say that is evil. Okay. And yes, you can have car tab taxes, and you can have a lot of stuff that we can argue with and disagree with. And I don't think that that's a problem. But I'm talking about fundamental freedoms, as in the Bill of Rights. I think about the basics. And when somebody wants to encroach and take away those, I think that's evil. I think people who would try and disarm Americans to take away their Second Amendment right and make them potential victims if we ever had a tyrannical government, people who do that, they're not wrong. They're evil. I'll pass the mic back.
Everyone who disagrees with you is evil. That's essentially what you're going with there, because gun control, someone can advocate for gun control for good reasons. They can advocate for it because they think that people are being hurt. They're not evil at heart for advocating the idea that we need to protect people. That's not an evil concept. It might be one you disagree with, and I disagree with it too, but that's entirely different than it actually being evil. Okay, your entire perspective on this is that if someone advocates for taking away what you believe to be an inherent right, they are evil. But there's a difference between, even if you were right about this, let's say you're right about it. Let's say all the things that you believe, all these rights that you believe you have, if someone advocates against them, that's evil. Even if you were right about that, that wouldn't make the person themselves evil. That would mean the thing that they advocated was evil. But good people can commit evil things all the time. That's why Christians would say that that good people can be sinners. Pretty much every religion believes that good people can do bad things. Even if you were right about what you're saying, that these people who would advocate these things are committing evils, which I don't think you're right about that. But even if you were, that wouldn't make they themselves evil. That would just mean that they supported something which was a mistake. That was an evil mistake. Maybe it's even a drastic evil mistake, but that does not make they themselves evil.
Well, we're now getting into a little bit of a distinction without a difference, because to me, it's like if you support slavery, slavery is evil. I think that's wrong, and I think it's action. If you support taking people's rights away, that's evil. You know, if you want to take away my rights, I have a right to disagree, and I also have a right to say I think that's evil. I think we need to call out what things are. And I think if we had a representative republic, the way our founding fathers had, we would have limited government, and there would be no big discussion as to whether or not certain rights. Everybody would understand that you have individual rights. Okay, as I said before, people can collaborate. I don't believe in socialism, but if everybody who believes in socialism wishes to go and live in socialism, they can do it themselves voluntarily. If you believe in gun control and want to give up your guns, that's fine. But I have a right to avoid socialism. I have a right to keep my guns. I have a right to my personal freedoms, and I consider anybody who's trying to take my rights away the same thing that I would consider that, you know, an African American in 1850, somebody tries to track him down and put him into slavery. That's a great evil. You're taking away his rights, his freedoms, his abilities to be himself. If you try and take away my rights, I mean, the idea of the car accident. Okay, you can say we need safer cars, but if you were on a campaign to end automotive transportation just because you suffered, it's like, go out and campaign for people to do it voluntarily, but don't infringe on my rights. A lot of times in the Bill of Rights, it says Congress shall not infringe. When you've got people who want to basically kind of convince and say, in this case, we want an exception. Congress should pass a law and infringe people's rights. When you start having people who want to infringe on other people's rights, I think that's a great evil. And we need to call it for what it is. Otherwise, you get people saying, yeah, just a little bit of erosion here, just a little bit of erosion there. And pretty soon you get to the point where very few people understand the Constitution, recognize the Constitution, and we end up with a government full of big statists who want to grow government more and more. And we're $20 trillion in debt and $150 trillion of unfunded liabilities, all because people thought, well, we ought to pass a law here, we ought to pass a law there, we ought to spend here, even though it's not in the Constitution. We've had a bunch of little wrongs and disagreements that turn into a great evil, a huge, huge debt burden on our poor children. And we ought to educate them about how screwed up the parents and grandparents have been in giving them this huge debt.
Okay, my first response is that not everything is black and white. You have this tendency to paint things in this broad brush as if homeschooling is either perfect or bad, but it's not. And I can tell you this from personal experience. There are benefits and there are flaws. The same is true with gun control or pretty much any other issue. There are going to be positives and negatives on each side. The reason there is room for debate is because impact calculus, in debate we call it net benefits. You can weigh the positives, the advantages, versus the disadvantages. And oftentimes, it's a very close outcome. That's why about half the country will be divided on each side of the issue, because they're each weighing the benefits versus disadvantages in a different way. You act like this is either you believe this and you are good, or you disbelieve it and you're bad. No. You can recognize that there are good faith arguments on both sides. There's a lot of gray areas in this world. My second response is that you never proved these things are rights. You have this way of talking about rights as if it's such a clear, obvious concept that everyone agrees with you and it's obvious, everyone knows these are rights. But you never proved what the standard would be for determining that. You just said you believe in this standard. You also never talked about how other people could have a different standard. You just assume that your standard is necessarily correct and that the founding fathers would 100% agree with you 100% of the way, therefore you're right. Well, you never proved that. Show me some warrants, show me some arguments to show the standards when it comes to homeschooling. And my last argument I want to present here is that you, in your speech, compared the idea of supporting slavery to the idea of supporting gun control. But those are not equivalent evils. Even if you're right about this, do you not accept the idea that there are different levels of good and bad? This comes back again to the way that I think that you have this tendency of painting things in black or white rather than recognizing that certain things on a scale are worse than others.
I think there are absolute rights. And absolute rights, I don't believe, are subject to gray area debates. Free speech is not a net benefit where it's evaluated by a party to decide, shall this speaker be allowed to give speech because we may or may not like what he says. Free speech is an absolute right. And I believe that parents' rights are almost absolute, except where the state can show compelling evidence that there's a problem. Okay, it's one thing to have a regulation, like in the state of Washington, what you have is there's a requirement that homeschooled students are tested annually. Now, it's an independent testing board that can be used. You can go to a certified teacher, and that certified teacher can do an assessment. There are ways of doing assessments, and you can see neighbors. There's lots of potentials for, I'll call it, sanity checks and safety checks for the extremely rare outliers. The presumption is parents have a right, and I shouldn't have to prove that I have a right to a right. You should have to be able to demonstrate conclusively that that right is subject to government control. And thus far, you haven't done that. What you've done is you've said, yeah, homeschooling can be problematic. It can be good. Well, I've got a stake into it. Let me introduce you to a few here. Okay, this is my daughter. Captain, United States Army, Nurse Corps, spent 10 years in the Army. She was homeschooled until she went off to college. Okay, she is married, is going to have children, and she hopes to homeschool her children. Here's my older son. He's a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, graduated from the Naval Academy with honors, from Naval Postgrad School with honors. He is the #3 officer on a nuclear submarine of about 150 crew. Okay, he was homeschooled. He complains that his one drawback about how homeschooling set him back was he was not familiar with modern culture and music and other stuff, and the upper class are kind of going, you don't know who Beyonce is, you don't know who this, that, and the other. Normally, plebes can't listen to music during the first year that they're on the yard, but they gave him a bunch of CDs and said, you need to listen to these and you need to get up to speed. He likes classical music like I do, and so it was a bit of a painful assignment. But that's the one place where his homeschool shortchanged him. He wasn't familiar with modern pop culture. And here's my number 2 son. Okay, he's a staff sergeant in the United States Army. He's on recruiting duty, working with high school kids who might choose the Army as a career.
All right, so you had first before I go into my, let me say that's really cool about your kids. That's really awesome that it worked out for them. And I, as you've seen from a previous debate of mine, I'm fully aware of the fact that homeschooling can and often does work out very well for kids. So congratulations to you. Your kids sound amazing. Good luck to them in their futures and everything. That being said, as far as this debate goes, you had 2 arguments. The first was that free speech is an absolute right and that there are absolute rights. I have 2 responses to this. My first response is that it was your opinion that absolute rights occur. You presented nothing to prove that there are just automatic absolute rights, and you presented nothing to prove that there is a specific standard that shows this is what an absolute right is. It was just, you think this is an absolute right. Why? Where? What is the standard on how humans in general can know what actual absolute rights are? The second response is that of violence. I actually disagree with you. Here's a perfect example of this. I disagree with you that free speech is an absolute right. I think free speech is fantastic, and I think it's almost a right. But if I say to you, I'm going to kill you, that is not a protected level of speech. There is a certain type of speech that can and should be prevented against. So that would mean that free speech, even just the idea of talking in general, is not an absolute right. Threats are not accepted. They are not an absolute right. If you threaten someone, they have a right to respond in self-defense. Your second argument was that parents should have an absolute right to homeschool their children unless the state can show a significant problem. Now, to a certain extent, I agree with you on this. The problem is, here's the difference between us. You assume that the states can't show that because there are certain times when homeschooling works. But this is just a difference of opinion because there's so many problems that can occur in homeschooling. So then it's about a weighing mechanism. Here are some of the things that state could point to. For one thing, the socialization. You even admitted that some of your kids had some difficulties with socialization. For some, it's better or harder than others. It's sometimes it can be beneficial, sometimes it's really bad. I've seen homeschooled kids who cannot work with kids their own age or with any other kids just because they have no idea how to relate to them. They also could talk about credentialed teachers. Kids in schools have credentialed teachers. This is a benefit for them as opposed to homeschoolers who have their parents, oftentimes parents who don't even have a high school education, who have no clue how to educate. My younger brother, my mom was sick, so my brother essentially homeschooled himself for 10 years. This was a problem. It wasn't good. And since there was no oversight, or actually there was supposed to be oversight, but it didn't even work. So sometimes my brother has said, I think homeschooling should be stopped. I don't know if he specifically said it should be illegal, but I don't think he's evil for having that opinion. The point is, there are problems.
Okay, first of all, you're wrong. I do have a right to say something that would be threatening to you. Okay, there is no prior restraint. The government does not require me to get my speech pre-approved. What you're saying is correct. There are consequences if certain speech is defamatory, threatening, you know, the old, if you yell fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire. But free speech does not come under government purview, and you got to get approval before you speech. And in the same way, I'm not saying that there aren't problems with homeschooling and there aren't some ways of controlling it. I'm basically saying that the general permissiveness is towards parents having the right to do it, and a blanket enforcement of thou shalt not homeschool is wrong. And because it would violate, like trying to keep me from ever speaking my freedom, my free thoughts, that's evil. Okay. And I'll go back to the fact that I shouldn't have to prove absolute rights. I will refer you to the Declaration of Independence. I will refer you to the Constitution and what our founding fathers set up in. And if you disagree, then you and I are on the opposite ends of an area. It's like me being the socialized person and you the headhunter discussing the menu for dinner. You don't see anything wrong with killing and eating people, and I think it's wrong. I believe in the fact that I have an inalienable rights granted by nature and nature's God. I have the right to the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and that government is to be limited and government is constrained all the way through the 9th and 10th Amendments. And if you don't believe in those rights, and I have to prove that I have those rights to you, then we're on different worlds. Because I believe as a human, I have them naturally. If you don't believe in natural rights, then we're at odds. It's like a blind man trying to have explained to him colors by somebody who is sighted. So I'll let you respond.
The only reason I presented that question is because I'm trying to establish a basis for how you come to your conclusion. Your entire conclusion is based off of this idea that I have natural rights, I know what they are, if you disagree, you're evil. Well, but you have to show why no one could disagree. Your entire argument is just your own personal opinion. Show some standard that would show that those who disagree with you are completely ignoring a basic logical standard. If you could show that, then you might have an argument, but you can't even get there. Your entire reason for believing in these things is just, I know it. That's not enough. So you talked about how you shouldn't have to prove absolute rights. Now I have two responses to this. My first response is that different people have different interpretations. You assume natural rights are one thing, but someone else could believe that the correct amount of rights is entirely different. They could agree with you that there are natural rights, and yet they could believe they're totally different things. Unless you can show the standard for why your interpretation is necessarily correct, it is utterly inaccurate of you to say that someone who disagrees with you is necessarily evil. And that's what we're debating here. Are those who would try to make homeschooling illegal evil people? I do not think so. I don't think you've shown any way in which they are necessarily evil. The second response I have is that the Constitution could be wrong. I know, blasphemy, right? But your entire basis for, oh, I know I have natural rights. I know I have these rights. I'll point you to the Declaration. I'll point you to the Constitution. Therefore, I have them. But that isn't actually an argument. That's just a codification of something that it believed were rights. How do you know it's right? Everything about your argument is simply an appeal to something else. You have no reason to believe these things in and of themselves.
Well, as I said, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Declaration of Independence. I believe that I have inherent rights. It would be like deciding whether or not somebody who's in a hospital and he's got serious problems, he's on a ventilator, we can debate the relative merits of whether we should take him off and kill him or not. He's still got brain activity. No, I personally believe that that person is still a human and he is treated as a human. I'm not in favor of taking away people's rights. I firmly believe that people who would take away my rights, as promised by the Declaration, as promised by the Constitution, if they wish to force their will onto me and deprive me of my rights, my liberties, I believe that's evil. I can't say it any other way. Now, we can have arguments and debates, and I don't think there's a problem with that. I'm basically saying those who would act in a way to take away my rights, those who would push for legislation to take away my rights, homeschooling in this case or others, they're evil. I'll pass it back to you.
Here's the problem. Every time you come back to this, you keep coming back to this idea that you do not want someone to take away your rights. And yet nothing you have presented in this debate has shown any objective standard at all of what your objective rights are. You just assume everyone knows what your objective rights are. But everyone has a different interpretation of that. That's why we have debates. If everyone agreed on what rights are, there wouldn't be debates. In fact, there would very rarely be arguments because people would already know. But we don't know that because humanity is fallen. We are subjective. So nothing you've presented there has any actual reason to believe that. Let's come back to the resolution. Homeschooling should remain legal. I agree. And people who would try to make it illegal are evil. Absolutely not. I presented earlier the fact that I debated Josh Brandon and I defended homeschooling. And I will defend homeschooling because I think that oftentimes it can be good. But Josh is not an evil person. You presented nothing that would suggest that he is an evil person. He just disagrees. And that's okay. That's why we have QallOut. We can get away from our own personal echo chambers and hear their perspectives. Hopefully some of my arguments were able to convince him. I don't know. We'll see. But he's not evil. How about the people at Homeschoolers Anonymous? The ones who have been abused, who believe that because those systems of abuse exist, the best solution is to ban homeschooling. They might be wrong. They might be. But it is completely wrong to assume that they are necessarily evil people just because they disagree. How about the other people who advocate against homeschooling because they think that it hurts people's socialization? I've seen the problems with socialization. You know what? I'm going to present another example here. A person very close to me recently pointed out that because she didn't know enough about the world, she didn't know that she wasn't supposed to just take a drink from someone who handed her a drink in a bar. And it was roofied. And she wound up in a very dangerous situation. And that's the sort of thing that I see from a lot of homeschoolers. Because they haven't been exposed to the real world, they are very easy to take advantage of. Now, I don't think that means homeschooling should necessarily be illegal, but I could understand an argument based off of that saying, you know what, this is dangerous. And I think it's this whole idea that anyone who disagrees with you is evil is just completely false. Even if they advocate against what you believe, that does not make them evil.
Okay, you keep twisting. There's a difference between disagreement and actively advocating and pushing for what I believe are evil laws. People who push for big government solutions. Hey, we've got high medical costs. Let's basically make everybody go to weigh-ins, and we're going to have the government prescribe what diets they can and can't eat. We're going to control their food input and what they purchase because we got too many fat people. That's big government nanny state, and anybody pushing for that, that's evil. Okay, I think we can come up with a whole bunch of things that government could do for the sake of better people and better government. But anything that empowers bigger and broader government gives a bigger and bigger control to government. And people who push for bigger government, I inherently believe are evil, because at some point we're going to end up with jackbooted thugs oppressing people. We've already got violations of child protective services, stealing children away under false premises. There are cases that need to be looked into, but the CPS will act improperly quite often. And without proper government restraints, the potential for growing evil is there. It's not people disagreeing with me that makes it evil. It's people actively deciding that they are going to diminish individual rights and they are going to grow government power. People who want to grow government power are going to empower governments like Venezuela or Nazi Germany. And anybody who wants more and more government power at sacrifice of individual liberties, that's not a disagreement. That's evil. I'll let you have it.
All right, your standard is entirely subjective. Again, you have no reason to believe that these rights, the only reason you accept these rights is because you know you have them. But other people might have a difference of opinion. They might have a different standard. Unless you can show some objective standard that says this is what rights must be, everything you're basing your arguments off of is just your opinion. And there's no reason to believe that those who disagree with you are necessarily evil. My second response there would be that an evil act is different than an evil person. Even if you're right that these people are advocating something that is evil, that is different than them actually being evil themselves. According to this resolution, you have not proven it because those who would try to make homeschooling illegal are not evil.